it's still gonna feel like pieces. That magic moment does happen and it's delightful, but it's gonna be like next week. What you do have, and I just kind of want to orient us about these pieces, this rough type of shape when it has this curve, this is basically your crotch line that goes right there. It's like the girth line of the pants, which makes this basically, this top side, your waistline. Does that make some kind of visual sense of how these pieces fit together? And then this is the back. The one that has this marking, which we will explain shortly, is the back, and the other one is going to be the front. So you have 4 leg pieces total, and a bunch of bits and pieces to create the pockets and the bands and the closures and all that other good stuff. That's the basics. Yeah? Okay. I see nodding. Nodding is good. So what we're going to start with is basically prep work. You are going to be learning about complicated forms of pockets, which is my favorite. So everybody's going to have these little dudes. We can kind of see that these, can we see how these little dudes become like the flaps of the pocket on the back? So the first thing we're going to do is stitch these together. So you're going to have, you may have 4 that match, you may have sort of an underlining and a fashion fabric and outer fabric. Doesn't really matter because they're going to be the same. They're symmetrical in every way, so it's not a huge deal regardless. But if you do have 2 colors, you want to pair them 1 to 1. Does that make sense? Now for these, you can see there's this little outline, and that's your stitch line. So this you'll be able to see. This is my back pant. One day, this will be the line of that pocket. We're not inserting it yet because we want to see it on the human body and see where it actually needs to go before we actually do that. So this is a theoretical line. But you can see that here to here on these markings matches up there. Does that make sense? So that's where that's going to go, if that helps orient you to how these pants make sense one day.
We have a question.
Yes.
Can we start cutting?
Yeah, if you feel ready to start cutting, start cutting.
Cut on the black line or around this space?
Cut on the black. Well, okay, when you're just dividing them, cut close to, but you don't have to be perfect because it's going to be perfect when you cut it on the fabric. Does that make sense?
Okay, but if I'm cutting out a piece I know I'm going to use, should I just cut off the line?
You totally can. You just don't have, what I'm saying is you don't have to be too careful because you will cut right on it, cut right through it when you do it on the fabric.
Okay.
Whatever soothes you. So we're going to go ahead and sew around this outline, and that's all we're going to do. We're going to leave the top open. So this stays open, and this curve we're sewing on. We're going to go over here. We're going to go up to our 3.5, and I'm going to do this in an obnoxious color, or whatever's in here, which is white, just so it's really, really obvious so you can see it as clearly as possible, because if I was matching this, it would be harder for you to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to put this in here. Yeah, I have pink and white in here. And if I was just doing this myself, I honestly probably wouldn't pin it, but that's because, you know, I'm not very nice to myself, so we're going to be real about it. So we're stitching on the line as it's drawn, which is the exact same thing that we've done on our paper project so far. It's just a slightly different one, but we're doing curve, corner, curve. We are doing an anchor stitch, and you can start slightly above if you wanted to, just to give yourself a little bit more space for that anchor stitch. So I'm starting like a little bit above where that starts, going back. Boom. Doesn't have to be too perfect because it's all going into a seam, and now I'm following that curve. And I'm lifting up because it just ran into a pin. And then I'm going to hand crank until I get right to that corner. And then I'm going to go back down. I'm following that curve. Now on this, we want it to look perfect from the outside, but some of that is going to also be achieved in the pressing of it. So we can see I got a little bit offline there on the point, but to my eye, when I turn this inside out and press it, that's not going to matter. But you do want to like look at it, gauge for yourself. Is it far enough away that it makes any realistic difference from the outside? And it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to do your best guess and be wrong. That's kind of what we're here for. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these pins. The next thing you are going to do, because we know this for sure, this is not part of fitting, these are all the same size for everyone. You're going to go ahead now that we've sewn it and you're going to trim it down to quite close. This is probably an 1/8-ish of an inch that I'm cutting right now automatically, but you kind of want to do, what's a good gauge? What's a good gauge for someone who hasn't memorized the ruler in their brain? A little bit. Do you need something further than, like, Does that make visual sense? Yeah? Doing close enough too. Close enough too that it's not in danger of pulling, but it's going to vanish into the press when we turn it inside out. And it'll be here if you need to look at it. A little bit. I'm a great teacher, yes.
Are we serging anything?
We are, if we're surging, we'll do it at the end.
Okay.
Partially because I want to make sure everyone's ready with the sewing machine before we move to a new machine, and
Yeah.
also because I prefer to serge after fittings, personally. Not everybody agrees. So now I'm going to go through, and everywhere that I've sewn that seam, I'm just pressing with my finger from the inside to get as close to the edge and kind of tell the fibers, like, don't, I want you to be flat like this. They're going to fight me a little bit. See how it's just kind of like it's lost some of that shape? I might go in with something like a pencil or the tip of a pair of scissors, kind of push out that corner a little bit so that we start to see that little, does that make sense? Get in that point. We love beautiful points. And you can see that that little bit that I got off ultimately doesn't make a difference. And then I'm going to go over here and same routine that we already know. Get him soggy, get him across. Look at it, make sure that as you were pressing it, it didn't kind of like creep up or like kind of like creep to the side because the iron covers the whole thing. And once we've done that, we're gonna go ahead and top stitch it really carefully. Now this is gonna take a little bit of finesse. We're gonna go back down to 2.5. In theory, yes. And we're trying that little bit that you cut, we're trying to sew on that. We're trying to sew right next to the edge. So this is top stitching is a technique for making sure that two pieces kind of stay flat together and keep like they're one piece. We do it a lot on collars, things like this, anything that looks better with a lining, basically. So I'm just stitching along the whole edge, starting at the top. Are you stuck? No, you're not. And this is going to be visible from the outside, so this is the moment when, if you were going to be kind of neurotic and picky about it, this is the moment to pick, to make sure that your corner is right where it needs to be. Oh, excuse you. Are you tangled, or are you just being weird? It is tangled. Dear sewing machine, what are you doing with your life? Ah. So I ran low enough on bobbin that now it's all messed up and it's not going to sew very well. Extra bobbin. Do it. Anybody see where I just set down the bobbin and shield? Here it is. So in this type of situation where it just right at that point is where it got funky, like that's actually the point that you want to look nice right at that point because it's going to be visible. If that's the point where the machine messes up, I would probably go to you and say, hey, go ahead and take that back out. I'm not going to take time off from your demonstration to do that, but do we understand why we might do that, where it's like messed up right at a pretty point? Does that make sense?
Wait, say that one more time.
So when I was using the sewing machine, it got tangled like right here. This is going to be visible. You're going to be doing it in a color matched thread or close enough so it won't be this visible, but it's going to be visible. So if this happened to you where the stitching gets ugly because it tangles right at that point, I would say like maybe go back or take the whole thing out and start again.
Okay.
So this is a point to like pay attention to how pretty it is. This is the neurotic point, not the it's fine point. Yep.
Gotcha.
So you would do that all the way around. Do you need me to demonstrate that further, or does that make sense so far?
I think
Yeah.
it does.
So seaming it together and then top stitching, and then you'll have your back pocket flaps prepared. You're gonna do that on both of these. That's your step one. What time are we at? 10:23. 10:23? Faster. Next up, we're gonna learn how to put in a dart. Anybody know what a dart is in sewing?
I like can sort of explain it.
Give me the sort of version.
It's like
Well, okay, you know, well, I guess, I don't know if men's clothing has it a lot, but women's clothing has it a lot, where they have like darts in the chest area to make it more cinched and like, I don't think cinch is the right word, but it's like a very like specific point so that the garment fits like just
Yes.
right.
It creates a shape within a single piece. So if I were trying to, for example, shape around a rounded bust, there's an inner here and outer here, right? If I were doing that with a seam, I would have different pieces that create that seam. If I were doing it with a dart, I would have one piece that falls flat from here, and I would take in, pinch that fabric together to create that shape. Does that make sense? Yeah? Visual
There's a
sense?
dart in my top if you want it.
Oh yes, there is. There from the side too. Sometimes we do that. A lot of times when people have larger busts, there's one from the armpit that has to go down because how fabric works, it goes like right there. Just one fact. So we're gonna look at this today. The first thing we're gonna learn is how to mark a dart. This is your dart on the back of your pants. The piece of the body that it is for to help shape is basically here into the butt. Does that make sense? So we're gonna put in this dart, and then once we fit it, you're gonna find out if there's enough dart, if you need more darts, if you need to take this one out and make it bigger, if you need less dart, all that good stuff. So this is take one, which means, good news, it could be temporary. So if you mess up, yeah, it's fine. So what we're gonna do, this is tracing paper. This side is wax. Put the colored side down. There's a ton of this around. If you can't find it, just ask someone who's in here. You place it underneath the area. So all of you will have one of these marked and not the other. I'm gonna place it under here, underneath the area where the mark that you do have is. And you're gonna transfer it to the other piece. And you'll probably have to do this for a few other things as well, which is why we're practicing it early. Gonna take a little wheelie do, any pointy little wheelie do. He's gonna pierce through the fabric and press that colored wax into the next piece of fabric. So you're transferring tracing directly with this wheel. So you're gonna run it over the whole area. And the reason that I took this fabric to demo, do you see how squinching it is, how much it's moving on me? I took the most annoying fabric out of the ones that we have so far because this is gonna be the most challenging one I want to inflict on you. And you can see that my tracing paper only went so far. It only covered to about here. So then I'm gonna go ahead and budget down, reline up my fabric so that it matches up, and then get the bottom part of it. This is a soft surface. It's a little bit easier on a hard surface, but it doesn't make a huge difference. It's just sort of a more pleasant experience. And then typically I would go back in with like my white chalk. There's a ton of these over here, a ton of chalk marking materials. All of that is good for fabric and will iron back off. So it's basically steam reactive, and once you don't want it anymore, it'll come back off. Don't use Sharpies, she says from long experience. So I'm now gonna go over this so that my line that I've just made is more visible and more obvious for me to sew on. Questions, concerns so far? All make sense? I've done this because this is kind of like a wide tip. See how wide this is? I know I put this edge, this is the edge that's real, and this just kind of flexed out. So I'm gonna be sewing like right here. If you have a wide edge, just make sure that it's kind of deliberately so that you know which side you're stitching on. Yeah? Sewing a dart. So the catch here is that you want to make sure that you have two that are facing different ways. You can sew a dart from the inside or from the outside, but I don't want two pieces going the same direction because we've got a right and a left leg. Yeah? So I'm gonna turn this one out here, and I will always keep them in this orientation so I know I have one of each the whole time because it is so deeply easy to end up with two left legs and then go through all the steps and then try to put the legs together and realize that you have to undo one completely and have to go back and redo it, okay? So remember, you always want facing pieces, not identical pieces, and they'll look identical otherwise. So I know this boy's facing this way, which will always remind me to keep this boy facing this way. I'm gonna find the center point. So basically go to each of these points, and I'm gonna try to point this over here so that the camera can see it. Center points, these little points, pinch it together, and then I'm gonna pin it. I could press it first, and actually in this case I think I might because this fabric is floppy. Pinch it together, press it down. Which barely worked because of how this fabric is. Ha ha ha, you're welcome guys, I did this to myself. I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna start pinning it. I'm gonna pin on the line. My first like strike of the pin goes into the line, pops back out. Then I'm gonna flip it and see if it's on the line on the other side. That's what's going to tell me, is it symmetrical? Yeah, I see nodding. Yeah. You want your stitching ultimately, and I'm changing it now because it wasn't. So I just went nudge and restuck the pin so that I know all of my lines are lining up so that when I stitch, it's going to be on the line on both sides. We're going to be picky about this because it is a very important dart skill. So this is the one I want you to pay attention to, yeah? How are we doing on brain space?
Not a lot.
Not a lot left?
No.
Not a lot left. Are we like
It,
negative yet?
it's like I have problems with paying attention, so I'm saving all my questions for after.
That
it's
is
done.
totally okay. We're almost done with what we're going to do for next class. But the end game is that you are going to do this on both of your pant legs. Oh, that did not work at all. Okay, so let me show you. I'm going to do this one more time because trust me, you will have this question later. Do you see how here, pin goes in on the line? Here, pin goes in, nowhere near the line. Nowhere near the line, in the line. So I'm going to pull it back out. I'm going to munge, stick it through once until it's on the line from both sides, and then pin it down. Your fabric's going to try to move on you. It's going to do it. Then I'm going to go through here. I'm going to start at the top. We do not do an anchor stitch for darts. The reason being that very, very narrow point, if the double anchor stitch kind of takes up a little bit of bulk, so it'll make it kind of pointy and awkward, we tie it off at the end. So you do not ever need to anchor stitch a dart. In fact, please do not. Are you just tangled in general? Are you punishing me for something? No. Oh, and I should have turned this back up to 3.5 to make it easier for myself later if I'm going to undo it after fittings. So the bigger your stitch, the easier to undo. If the fitting turns out you need to change something. I know I've said that before. I will say it 1,000 more times. And you're going to sew right off.
I think the fabric's like tangled. Yeah.
Okay. So that's what you want to end up with. This is definitely close enough. I'm going to show it around. You can see tiny bit off. That is close enough. If it was that much off across the whole thing, I would judge you harshly. Does that help us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You look terrified. Are you okay?
No, it's I'll bring it up later.
You're okay. No, we'll figure it out. We will. This is your first time seeing it, and you have plenty of time to try it out.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so we're what? We're at a few steps in. I'm not gonna get to that today. That's fine. What time are we at, my friend?
About 15 minutes left.
15 minutes? Can you let me know in 5 minutes to stop and ask for questions? So now I'm going to turn it. This is my left side, my inside now. Whatever dart you're like the pointy end of your dart now, it's pointing inward. That's now the inside forever. Which means this is my outside. We press. We're going to press it flat. We press towards the point of the crotch. It's not necessary, it's just tradition and accepted practice that we always press anything on the torso, we always press towards the center of the torso. If we have darts in there. But ironically, if we have seams in there, we press it the other way. Do I know that? No. I'm going to keep pressing. Oh, this fabric's melted too. And you're gonna notice, I'll hold it up so you can see, pressing a dart's a little tricky. Look at that little like lumpy boy. He don't want to lie flat. He's trying to fight me. I'm gonna pull him, kind of like just from underneath, kind of like a tug, because you want to get a dart completely perfect. It wants to vanish into the fabric. You kind of want anybody who didn't know you did that to never know that you did that. And if I have to, I will grab one of these, which has a little bit of a curve on it as opposed to the flat table. And I'll press it out here because that curve is going to be better able to get into that little nook and get that pressed absolutely flat. And get it as flat as I can. Spray it one more time. That is plenty fine for a first fitting. Your fabric is likely to be a little bit friendlier and a little bit less annoying. You're going to do that on both legs. Then you're going to stop and you're going to check and make sure that they're actually facing opposite directions. Yes? Good. Let me think if that's okay. So you've got your pockets, you've got your darts. room for one more step or 0% room for one more step? Sleep, okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be the same either
That's
way.
good. Okay, great.
Maybe-
That's the question. Is this
Maybe
gonna
questions about the things first and then move on
questions?
to the-
Yeah. What do we got? Questions, concerns? Yet,
I'll have questions when I'm doing it.
as you're doing it. Great. Well, it's perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll have them as we go. The next thing we're gonna do, and this is the last thing we're gonna do, but I promise it's gonna go color. These boys are exactly the same as the pockets, they're just a different shape. So I don't even necessarily know that I need to demonstrate this, but I gladly will. And actually, real quick, I'm gonna do it. This is basically like a back band. It goes back here and lets you tighten it a little bit if you, that's what you're going. It's a pure detail. This edge is the edge that we don't need to sew. Wait, am I right? I'm lying to you. I just lied to you. I apologize. Yeah, that's the edge that you don't need to sew.
So it's
So the flat edge, the flat short edge, you don't need to sew across there because you're gonna pull it inside out and it's gonna be a little bit thinner. It's gonna be a little bit tricky to do that. So
You
you're just gonna
did
leave
tell
them.
us the truth.
What?
You did tell us the truth.
I did tell us the truth, and then I thought I lied. So I backtracked and then lied and then told you the truth again. It's this one.
Nice.
This one. Camera, it's this one. So all we're gonna do is the exact same thing, except we have no line to follow. So you're just gonna go on that line that we practiced on, that same guideline that we were practicing on for our practice seams. Forward, do put a anchor stitch in. Keep going forward, la 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 la. Get to your corner. I realized I did it again where I wouldn't pin this, but at the place that you guys are at, you probably do want to. So that's a personal preference. Can you hold it? Is it gonna work for you or not? I don't care if you use pins, but you might. Turn your two corners, just like we practiced. Forward all the way. Back to your open edge. Pull it off. You now have like a little Arab dude. Exact same thing. Trim it down to quite close. Slash many of these techniques, those of you who now have lapels in your life are going to be doing the exact same thing, just on a different shape. Exact same steps. To get those pointed lapels. Or curved lapels, actually. Trim him down. And what I would then do is spin him inside out, right? I would take the time, which I don't want to take right now, probably, unless it turns out to be mysteriously easy. Spin it inside out, poke it a little bit so all your corners are pointing out, press it down so it's nice and flat. Just like we, exact same thing with the pocket, just a different shape. 3 steps. Pocket, little arrow dude, back band, darts. Make sure your darts face a different direction. Make sure your pant legs are opposite ones. Everything else is identical. Speak now and forever hold your peace until you actually start sewing. Okay, cool. All right.